everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are today. It is really wonderful to moderate this particular webinar on navigating the AI wave with insights from Inflectra. I see a few frequent visitors to our webinars and some are new, so I'll just get the context here clearly. Inflectra helps you deliver quality software faster with lower risks. As it helps you run your critical software that runs the world, we need to be extremely cognizant of avoiding single points of failure and also continuously focusing on the mission, your mission, okay? So Inflectra has always been at the cusp of not only leading trends, but educating everyone on the process. We host numerous webinars on many topics, such as security, privacy, automation, agile practices, quality, project management, product management, and I'm sure I'm going to miss something, so the list is endless. This webinar is no different. It focuses on the AI wave that is impacting pretty much every industry today. Now, AI itself comes in many flavors. And this could be structured and unstructured learning, generative, narrow, and super intelligence, and many different flavors. So in this webinar, just to keep the focus, we will mainly focus on the generative AI and its benefits, challenges, and many things as we continue to discuss. But before we move forward into the details, let us have our panelists introduce briefly.
Thanks, Sriram, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Adam Sandman. You may know me, maybe not. I'm the CEO of Inflectra, founded the company 18 years ago. Doesn't seem that long. And my role here is tech strategy and business strategy and running this ship. And also, I've always been very excited about technology in general. And so this is a very interesting topic for me, irrespective of our interest in it as a company.
I'm Dermot Canniffe. I'm probably the newest addition to the Inflectra team of all the people here assembled. My background is in automation, test automation, and also software development. And I've been doing that since 2001. Lately, I've been working heavily in the area of pre-sales and kind of helping people with their solutions, integrating products, and so on. So now I'm doing that with Inflectra.
Simon Bor, I'm the CTO at Inflectra. Very excited to be here today. I think AI is a really fascinating topic. From talking to my team about it before this, I think one thing we can say is probably whatever we say today will have a shelf life of probably more than a day, less than a month.
2 weeks.
It's all moving so quickly. Yeah. So we could almost do the same thing again, and it'd be interesting to look at a year's time and see how different our answer would be to the topics we talk about today in a year from now.
And, my name is Sriram Rajagopalan. I'm an enterprise agile evangelist with Inflectra and head of training and learning services. That being said, as Simon was just mentioning, shelf life, many things that we say may not necessarily apply, longer than 2 days or maybe a week or, I don't know what it comes to. Nevertheless, when you take a look at software itself as an important element of what runs the world today, software has become very pivotal in today's digital society, right? In fact, there is not a single industry that I can think of where software in some shape or form, either a tool being used to do some work or we are developing something as part of the software itself that we are developing, it's become very pervasive. So the software development lifecycle that we all know as, planning, analysis, design, development, testing, deployment, and stuff like that, has a lot of manual oversight in designing, developing, testing, and deploying the software itself. Now, with respect to generative AI, Adam, I'm going to focus this question to you first. With respect to generative AI in the market, and I'm sure there are many opportunities that are ahead of us. With your experience and insights, what are some of the opportunities with generative AI that you see today, as well as emerging in the future, near future?
And right, thanks, Sriram. And it's an interesting question because you mentioned agile. You could argue that we're ripe for disruption because agile is literally nothing new. When I left my old company at Sapient, agile had been around for at least 4 years. So 2000, 2001, agile was emerging. That's a long time ago. That's 3 years ago, 24, depending on when you exactly count it. And before that, there were, pre-agile approaches that were iterative and used new technologies and methodologies. So if we look at where we are today, software development lifecycle is ripe for disruption, and we've tried disrupting it with various things like computer-based designs and 4GL languages and stuff like that. And if you look at actually software development, it's actually more human intensive than it has ever been before because of web and some of the newer technologies. It's actually more human and labor intensive than it has been if you go back to the Visual Basic days where you could literally click buttons and build apps. So it's interesting we're at this point where everyone and their brother wants to go into computer science because software is eating the world. And from a career standpoint, you ask any parent in any major city in the world, what should their kids do? 5 years ago, 10 years ago, be a lawyer. Now they want to get into computer science. And so you're getting into what I call peak programmer just at the exact moment that we now have technologies which are going to fundamentally change how we think of software, design software, develop software, and even use software. So in that sense, it's interesting. So how is it going to change? Well, we'll talk more about that in the different sessions to come. But it's going to change everything because it can allow us to do things we've never thought of. For example, the software itself can write requirements to some degree. You can upload people have shown online. You can get a napkin and draw that sketch. How many businesses were started with a sketch on a napkin? You upload that to a portal, push the button, and it generates all your user stories and all your requirements. Now it can write your test cases. Then it can do some of the testing. It can launch the app. It can interact with the browser or the mobile device. It can do some testing. It can take screenshots. It can give commentary. We've tried some of these things out with GenAI. And then it can also look at a web browser page and look at the DOM and try and figure out how to do automation. I mean, so many things that we are doing as humans, it can do, but it can't do fully. Can do it maybe 7-8 current day, 80% with lots of checking. Now, are we saving time? Are we not saving time? We don't know yet. What's the quality? What's the risk? Which we'll talk about. So I would say, I don't know the answer, but what I know is it's going to change completely. How it looks in 2 years will be very different than it looks today. And it will change every aspect of the life cycle from UX, design, user research, all the way through to development deployment. It will all change. And I think in this panel, it'll be good to find out what people think about that. But I think it will affect every phase in fundamental ways like that.
Good. Thanks, Sriram, for that wonderful thought process over here. So when I'm reading your mind over here, a few things come to my mind at this particular point. From a purely development perspective, what are some of the things, Dermot, that you think of in addition to what Adam was mentioning or piggybacking on what he was mentioning?
Well, I think the desire to use it as assistive technology in specifying elements of a project it's something that people have kind of latched onto very early in the discussion over GenAI, and that's great. I think people really love the idea of being able to click a button and just generate a pro forma set of requirements given a certain amount of input. I think in future, we might get better at it. So what people are using there is just a set of heuristics. So where GenAI really comes into its own is if you've got a back and forth, if you've got context, if you've got a discussion, and if you give the engine, whether it's a chatbot or some other sort of engine, you give it more context and give it more information, then it'll refine its results. And you can build a history basically with whatever system you're going to use, whatever engine you're going to use, and obviously backed by the language model in the background. So it'll be exciting to see how the uses people kind of latched onto early, how they can refine over time, and how people can actually leverage the benefits of the models.
Right. I'm thinking back to some of my old programming days, when I was doing Visual C++ programming. We used to have a Hello World application. It came with the actual installation package itself, and you run this Hello World application, hit the thing, and it proved the concept that your installation is working, compiler is fine, debugger is fine, and those kind of things. But it didn't do much, right? In order for you to actually do the work, whether it is user interface or whether it is writing your own complete classes and objects and methods and many things that go with that. From a product development standpoint, there's a lot more to think through. And yes, Adam was mentioning like, oh, you can write something on a piece of a napkin, and this is how the website looks, and give it to GenAI, and it creates a framework very easily, quickly. Yes, but from a product development standpoint, there is a lot more to quality consideration than just getting a website up and running. So both from a product development and quality standpoint, Simon, how is the landscape emerging from your standpoint?
Thanks, Sriram. I'm probably going to be a little bit a little bit more short term than I think Adam was. I think some of the things Adam was talking about are more visionary. I think today, some of those things are quite hard to do. I think it will be able to do a lot more in the future. But right now, I think it can get that great first example of a test case. It can create that first draft of here's a requirement, here's a sketch. Let me create requirements for you using generative AI, which then need humans to review and assess, as Dermot was saying. And it can create things like dummy data and those kinds of things, which are great. Practically, you can the interesting thing comes is what can you, Dermot was saying, oh, you can interact with it, you get information back, and then you can refine and refine. I think that is having those bots that could emerge to help us do things like testing or requirements validation is going to be really good. I think taking a step further is the bit that is very expensive to do now, is feeding GenAI a lot of information. Right now, you can take that step beforehand, which is tell it something about your application to write code for you based on a prompt you give it. But let's say you could give it your entire code base, or you can give it your entire requirement set, which might be 1 million words, or you give it all of your tests. You give it everything, all the information it knows about your project, its code, the bugs, the requirements, and then you can really start engaging with it in interesting ways. You can do that today. It's just very, very expensive. But you can then use that AI to help you by saying things like, what is my test coverage? Given this requirement, given I want to fix this bug, do I have tests that cover that bug? You can think of much more interactive questions you can ask because it will have that body of knowledge it doesn't have. Right now, it has zero knowledge, and you show it that napkin, you ask it that question. I think over time it will be cheaper, or applications will develop more power to make it easier to feed it large amounts of data. And then it basically becomes, in some ways, more knowledgeable about your application than your most experienced developers. And that's where I think things get very, very interesting in the future, where it can start to really speed up your development cycles much more than it can right now.
Excellent, Simon. As I was listening to you, in the agile context, we always talk about like test-driven development, right? And although we talk it in the context of agile, test-driven development itself is not specific to agile. It's been present for unit testing that we have to write so that we make sure that everything is looking good, our code looks good, and stuff like that. Now, there is test-driven development, there is acceptance test-driven development, there is behavior-driven development, and we've been talking about all these things, but less do we do them in our real life because time to market is important and we have very little time, and so we continue to do these things. Now, agile, not agile, the AI comes and helps in this particular fashion, but after the development is complete and before we go full-blown into the deployment in terms of regression testing, load testing, and stuff like that. From that angle, from a product development, aspect, do you see Gen AI playing a major role in today or in the future for those areas?
I think as Adam was saying, like it can generate or soon be able to generate tests for you. As I hinted at, it can tell you what tests to run. I think we'll probably touch on that more later in this discussion. So if you have something that can make tests for you on the fly based on what you're doing, and it can tell you which tests to run based on your existing tests, then you're really scoping down what you need to do in that QA phase, going from between development and release. And yeah, it might need some oversight, but if you say I've got 90% test coverage just by effectively asking the AI to do it, and then the humans just need to review the 10%. This isn't even writing automated tests. This is just pressing a button and the AI doing it. then I think you've radically scaled down what humans have to do. For load testing, I'm actually not sure about load testing, because load testing is a very particular beast and does require more technical setup. You can use GenAI to generate a lot of data for you, but those kind of things aren't too complicated now. That's more just setting up the infrastructure of 1,000 machines, all hitting a certain endpoint at once. That feels less like a GenAI problem. Other sorts of AI, I think, could help with load testing, but GenAI, I'm not quite sure where that could help with load testing. But certainly reducing the time, reducing the human engagement in test planning, test writing, and test execution, I think massively could reduce in the future.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. Putting on my project management hat, in some of the things that I have done as well. This discussion that we just had, like, Adam focusing on vision, strategy, and then Dermot focusing on the development angle, you focusing more on the entire, alignment and stuff like that. This vision, direction, alignment is something that we keep talking about in the project management angle, where we say, like, ways of working is emerging, they are changing. So you're no longer the person who goes into a cube and does what has been asked of you, because you had to come back and say, hey, what about this? What are you thought about this? So the ways of working, the power skills, the strategic business acumen that is really required is constantly changing. And we say this even in the, the 4Ds of the design thinking, like the discover, define, develop, and deploy, and, all those things we talk about. These points are emerging because all of us are able to contribute in terms of what should the value be? Should this be only on commercial, the customer value and the business value? Should we also start thinking in terms of the technical and the process value add and stuff like that? And as you were talking about all these, one thing, I always keep thinking in terms of the risk, right? Risks actually bleed into both positive and negative aspects, the opportunities and threats. We talked about the opportunities over here, but, I would also like to understand some of the things that you see from a challenges perspective. Now, no technology is always going to be always great. Everything comes with, it's like a double-edged sword, depending upon which side of the sword you are actually holding, it could hurt you too. So history has repeatedly informed us that, when people rush to implement something or cut corners during the process of implementing something, there is always more work in correcting that in terms of the overburden or unevenness and, or the waste that is actually getting created. In the project management or quality domain, we call this the Moda, Mora, Mori. And I want to actually, think from that angle in terms of the quality angle and ask a few questions. So Dermot, I want to, maybe focus this question first with you. While many of these opportunities that we are talking, earlier are really exciting for the software development process, product development landscape itself, what are some of the things that you strongly advocate carefully moving forward? Not necessarily avoiding it, but carefully moving forward with the GenAI techniques as we embrace them.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head there, Sriram. I am extremely excited about the technology, so it really pains me to be the one to say that we should make haste slowly and kind of be careful of the ground we're treading on. To borrow a phrase, trust but verify, I think is the applicable one here. Because unfortunately, Gen AI models that we might use whilst we're working on software are the product of human beings. As flawed and biased as we are, we do sometimes visit those biases on the software that we build, and AI models and AI engines are no exception. So I think many of you will have seen stories of where AI technologies have suffered from the bias of those developed. So, for example, facial recognition that only reliably recognizes Caucasians, or similar technological kind of snafus. One AI, I think, which used Twitter feeds as its language model, which really went pear-shaped very quickly. So, we have to be careful about how we set these up, but even once they're built, we also want to be judicious about how we use it. So we've spoken about kind of the ask and answer process, and it's kind of important there's this cognitive bias called the Einstellung effect, which basically means that if you're used to using something in a particular way, you're going to use it in a very similar way again. So people are used to using like Google search for finding the answers that they want, and they're using these chatbots in exactly the same way. It's not leveraging the technology. You do want to kind of give it more context, prime that system, and to give you better answers and be collaborative, basically, because that's the way that the chatbot is designed. So things like this, like it is an entirely new landscape, and we should kind of, as humans, we should kind of shake things up, approach it in a very different way, and that also comes to the way we interact with the model and interact with our teammates along the way. I mean, it has the potential to change everything within a team landscape and nothing. And in fact, there's research about that. I might post a link into the chat actually about these interactions and how they can fool you into thinking that you're getting value when you're not.
Excellent, Dermot. I'm glad you were mentioning this. As much as you are a technologist, you are also mentioning, like, don't walk too quickly on the eggshells, so walk slowly and, steadily. I love the thought process here, because you were mentioning the instilling effect as well. This boils down to something that I always tell as part of the digital ethics. So, the important things of beneficence, non-maleficence, justice, autonomy, and being able to make sure that the model itself is able to explain itself in a real setting. Like, if I'm going to be offering an input into some discussion as part of the product or project or work that I'm actually doing, then somebody may ask, why are you asking this? Why are you saying this? What have you thought? And the same thought process applies to a machine workforce. The GenAI is going to be more or less like an extended angle for us. And then they have to be able to explain themselves as to why they do this. So digital ethics is something that I always tell. And the human beings are becoming more or less like the operating system on which all these AI techniques are working. Like all these become more like a service layer on top of the human operating system. And if the human operating system doesn't work, then there's no point in having the GenAI techniques. I love that thinking here. Simon, I want to maybe expand the thought process over here and ask you, what are some of the best practices that you can think of when people are embracing GenAI in their process, in their product development and stuff like that, just so that they don't go too fast too soon and get into problems? So what are some of the best practices that you think of and you recommend?
Building off what Dermot was saying, you talked about trust and verify. I should say, I don't think it's I'd take the word trust out of there. Just say we have to verify, because we've all heard about AIs hallucinating, as well as obviously there's potential bias in the data they're fed, and they are still learning on their model set. And secondly, there's also signs now with the largest LLMs of emergent behavior. So you said, oh, can you ask the model to explain what it did? We're at the point now where the model can't explain what it did, and the developers of the model can't explain what it did either, which is in some ways very exciting, in some ways very scary. So I would say it's just about verify. It's still a very, very useful tool, but don't say, oh, because it said it has value, it might not have value. It's for us to assess whether it's correct or not, or whether it's made the wrong predictions in what to give us. So I think it's very useful to help us get to sketches, beta versions, alpha versions, help with idea generation in the product development space. In terms of other best practices, I think one thing is only use it where there's nothing better. As end users who have a chatbot, it's very easy to open up ChatGPT and ask it questions. As product designers, if we're building something for our customers, I would say use GenAI when there's nothing else better. If we can do it in code, that's better. If we can use a cheaper ML model, that's better. If we can use an LM rather than LLM, that's better too. It's more reliable and it's going to be cheaper. Only use the much more expensive generative AI where we really need to. because of the cost and reduce when we are using it. The next one is, kind of hinted at it in my earlier discussion point, give it as little information as you can, because tokens are expensive. It is going to come down, it is going to get cheaper over time, but be mindful of what you're giving it, either certainly as a product developer, because if you have what you do in testing is you're prototyping a tool, may be cheap. If you scale it out to 100,000 customers, it then becomes very, very expensive. On the token side too, as an end user, think about what you can do to be more efficient in your use of using GenAI. And the final thing I'd say, particularly for product developers, but also be mindful as users, is stability. I think what we're using, if a product has a GenAI component or feature now, it will not be the same in a year, or if it is the same, it's going to be outdated. So we need to be very careful as product designers and careful as product users of how we develop and use that feature. If you implement one particular feature, one particular model deep into your application and it's fundamental to your whole stack, well, that model is going to be outdated next week. Or the token limit is going to suddenly exponentially grow by hundreds of thousands. So we need to be careful and opportunistic in what we do now, and be mindful of the fact that stability is very, very low in what we develop now.
Excellent, excellent. While you are talking about this, I'm just looking at one of the questions in the chat forum, and that probably is a good one for you to tackle on right now, Simon. This is a little bit generic. At which level of testing it is preferable to apply AI in software testing?
And also, I know we can ask Adam the same question maybe, but I would say we already know lots of tools use AI for image recognition. So leaving image recognition aside and just focusing on GenAI, making test cases, depending on the tool you're using, interacting with the AI to create automated testing code, I think is very possible, again, using that verify or trust and verify. So developing your test cases, and Adam talked about analyzing your DOM and creating tests based on that. I also think there's scope, probably not right now, but in the future, for helping you determine test coverage. I think there are tools coming out that will help mix of your code and looking at your bugs and requirements and saying, I think these are the most likely tests to run. I think that is a very good space to work on now.
Very good, very good. Thanks for taking that, right there. Appreciate that, Simon. Now, Adam, I just wanted to, bring this particular discussion to a different level. And every AI model that we use is also dependent upon the level of training that it has gone through, the data it is using as its base and stuff like that, and the level of efficiency that it has and stuff like that. So what are some of the challenges in very quickly implementing Gen AI in your in your system? And I know Simon talked about having methods that are so deep in your thing, and if you're if that's not good for you, then it's probably not good for you and stuff like that. But I want to take it to a different level, from outside the product development itself. In Gen AI adoption, what are some of the biggest challenges that you think of that we should be really cognizant of?
Thanks, Sriram. And I agree with everything Simon has said and Dermot has said about the challenges in the development and testing space. 100%. In terms of the wider challenges, there's many. One thing that just struck me, I was thinking of this as we were talking, is traditionally in computer science, we always talk about garbage in and garbage out, the GIGO effect. And Gen AI and large language models definitely suffer from that, where the danger is you're assuming it to be infallible. And if you think about users, as you said, with the principle of people's experience of other technologies, when you use Microsoft Excel and you start doing formulas and equations and building a financial model, you're under the assumption that Excel is 100%, if the data is correct, put in, infallible, right? You put in financial analysis and out, you put some formulas in, do a linear regression, and what you get is right. Many people I know right now, instead of doing that because they're lazy, they basically feed in the data tables to ChatGPT and say, tell me what the cash flow of this company is. I know people who do this. This is not made up. And they take the answer. Now, to take Simon's point, they should be verifying it by going back to Excel, running the numbers in Excel, and then comparing it, but they don't. They just take it as gospel, which then goes back to the question we should ask is, why do people want to use Gen AI for these tasks anyway? Well, because basically people want a cheap and easy way of doing things. And so imagine if I was a recruitment person, I said to you, I could hire you could hire a really great developer. They've got amazing cognitive skills. You give them a business problem, they'll come up with an amazing application. They're expensive, but they'll do a really good job, and we have good quality, low risks, and they can work with the customer directly, and you can trust their work. Or I could give you 100 developers in some fictitious country that costs almost nothing, and they can generate lots and lots of boilerplate code for you really cheaply and quickly. Which would you rather have? And unfortunately, people seem to be thinking of like, well, I can get rid of all these people and save money. So it's basically we're outsourcing to the lowest common denominator, which is an infallible hallucinating child that we've managed to somehow train and feed with tokens. So if you think of the world like that, that's kind of what we're doing. And so Gen AI is amazing when it's being used appropriately, but we're often using it for tasks that it wasn't designed for, but it gives plausibly good answers and sometimes works. And that's dangerous. So that's a challenge from a sort of risk and quality aspect. This is without any malfeasance. Now, even before LLMs, any kind of ML and AI suffers from the danger of negative actors, malfeasant actors, malevolent actors trying to inject or poison the AI by giving it training data that will pollute its model and make it bias its answers. So the whole cyber hacking of an LLM, in theory, it's harder with a very large model because there's so much data that it's harder to modify its behavior than with an LM because there's less other data to bias it against being directed. But still, there is that danger if someone could make the model by sending it sufficient prompts in sufficient ways, they could target it so that subsequent prompts would be slightly different than when they first were asked, and thus change the outcome. So the danger of then fallibility, determinability, and interpretability, which was mentioned. We don't know how these applications even figure out the answer. Neither do they. Neither do developers. And yet we're going to base major decisions on them. So that's very dangerous. So I think Simon's right. Anything we can use algorithms, machine learning, traditional data sciences on is a better solution because the quality is more consistently accurate and it's going to be cheaper. Gen AI has a great set of capabilities where it's used appropriately and understanding the risks. Now, the other risk I would say from a business standpoint, which Simon alluded to, is many people are building their entire businesses around this. And what happened is, so when ChatGPT 3.5 came out, everyone starts writing SEO services. Like everyone and their brother suddenly has a write tool. I won't mention the brand names. We looked at a bunch, but they're basically wrappers around ChatGPT with a nice little UI and a billing plan. And suddenly GPT-4 comes out with DALL-E and image search, and suddenly everyone's going to unsubscribe to those and just start subscribing to the core model. And what's happening is you have all these businesses that have put ChatGPT or OpenAI or a model at their core. And as that model develops and becomes more sophisticated, their entire business model is undermined in 2 weeks. So for someone putting it at the core of their business, there's a big risk that you have this third-party changing actor that is your business. So that's just a business risk for someone who's going to use it as a core feature, as opposed to what we're thinking of, which will be, I think, part of the next question, which is using it to assist a feature as opposed to it being the feature. Like Microsoft is not saying Copilot replaces Visual Studio, it's in Visual Studio, and that's an important distinction.
Yeah, I really like that final concluding point that you are bringing as a a feather on the cap here. One of the things that I have seen many people do is they depend upon these tools to do the work for them. A simple use case is I was expecting some answer from one of the team members, and then that person was delayed in the response. And I asked them like, okay, why were you delayed? And the actual answer was, well, the OpenAI, the ChatGPT was down for a couple of days, so I was waiting for it to come back so that I can formulate my answer correctly and then respond to you. Come on, that's the inappropriate use of the the whole tool, right? So use technology, don't get used to technology, use it for the right purpose, as you mentioned here. And you were also mentioning in both Simon, Dermot, you were also, alluding to this, the malfeasance that I was mentioning in the digital ethics. It's very important for even in the product development to consider the abuser persona, not always look at the happy path and say, the person that will interface with our application will be always technically skilled and knowledgeable and things like that. But instead, if you are thinking of that Netflix, the chaos monkey thinking, How are we actually going to impersonate the actual abusers and then have protection in place in our system? That is also a thought process that we can use these GenAI tools to come up with additional use cases and scenarios. Now, talking about the additional use cases and scenarios, I want to actually talk about how Inflectra is spearheading this initiative as well here. Now, I know there were recently a few webinars that we did where we were talking about how the cutting edge Gen AI specific tools were used in our flagship product, SpiraPlan. And I want to talk about some of those elements. I know we had requirements to identify specific use case scenarios and things that we were talking about for verification and validation in terms of test case generation, and even the risk that actually potentially trip our product development and stuff like that. So we had those things. So with that thought process in mind, Simon, I want to start this question with you. What are some of the further practical uses of Gen AI techniques that you are and Inflectra is considering, not just Inflectra is considering. So can you maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Sriram. As you said, you mentioned that we have a ChatGPT Spire app to do a number of things with requirements, which is really great. We're looking to improve the accuracy of that over time. Just as the prompt engineering improves and as some of the structured data we can get back can improve. We're currently beta testing an Azure Copilot equivalent of the application. So I think basically the same functionality, but for customers who are using Azure as opposed to ChatGPT. Next, I want to talk a little bit about Rapise. I know you talked about SpiraPlan. Rapise is our test automation tool, and the next release is 8.2, and that will hopefully include features, some of the features that we were talking about earlier. You give it a web page, you give it an image, and it will write out some steps for you. You give it some information in plain English, and it will take that and turn it into code that you can then click run, and Rapise will then execute the test based on that information. So you can show it a picture of your login screen and say, log in to the application with this username and password. That's all you have to tell it, and it will then create a test that logs into the application for you. So that's really exciting. Again, it's not just, you still have to do the trust and verify, but that will give you lots of opportunities for people who are less expert at automation to either edit tests or create tests from scratch to then hand over to automation engineers to review. Going a bit beyond that, we have some other ideas that aren't as concrete as the ones I've been talking about. Taking our current Gen AI tools in Spira further to make them more of a bot which you can interact with, and potentially being able to ask it questions like what bugs are assigned to me, or when is the next release due, those kinds of questions that you can get from interacting with the tool itself. But it's sometimes a lot easier for people just to type the question in and get an answer. So we would use natural language processing from the LLM and then turn that into a series of commands to get the data back for the user. Taking a little bit further, there's also ideas about how you can integrate Spira and Rapise even more deeply. This is sort of not even a prototype, just like an idea we've been batting around, but you could take a requirement, feed it to GenAI and say, make me scenarios based on this requirement, say in using Gherkin or BDD style scenarios. A human reviews those, oh yeah, these are correct, makes changes to them, still things that a human can execute. And then you say, send to Rapise. It would send all that, effectively that requirement with scenarios to Rapise, which would then also generate test scripts based on those BDD style scenarios straight in Rapise. So that's taking basically, that's making the full test case for you completely automatically based on your requirement. So that's something very cool to make that very tight integration. Those are the kind of things we're thinking about. I'm going to stop there and maybe move over to Adam, because I know there's stuff that we're doing. There's also a number of really exciting initiatives that our partners are working on.
Sure, right. And one of the things that is important, I think, as a company is enlisting our partners into the process, because we have ideas, we have experiences, but they also work in different industries with different clients, and so trying to harness them to do that. and there's many different ideas that are being, again, batted around, but one of the ones that we're working on with a partner is to look at code quality and inspecting the code base. And I don't know, this is probably not actually Gen AI, so I'm maybe a little off-piste in terms of the topic, but it's machine learning and AI definitely, but it's not necessarily LLM style Gen AI, but using the data that we have and all this traceability data that we have in Spira to be able to understand code quality. Like, for example, I commit these commits into Git, they get mapped to requirements or don't get mapped to requirements, maybe that's missing. When that happens, there's previously been test failures or risks have been identified. So when someone can do something in the system, like commits a line of code, it can analyze the impact of that and say, this one developer, when they commit this one line of code, we should optimize the testing in this one area based on historical patterns. Or it could even be looking at when you commit code and then the automated test run, looking at how the UI has changed. You might be able to start to predict which of your tests need to be which need to be refactored before you even start to push the code into the pipeline into the main branch. So it's tying the different disciplines together, and I suppose if we think of it, I don't know what we'd call it, smell driven development, because every project manager developer can have like this intuitive sense of like, this code smells, or this area of the system has something that I know is worrying. You ask any product manager and you could say, which part of the system should I never touch unless I've got a lot of time to spend? And Simon could tell you on Spire and our Rapise R&D team on Rapise, and I know some of the different tools. And historically, we just know that for whatever reason that part of the system has more weaknesses in these areas. And if you do certain things, you should plan more QA time. And we also know that certain other areas are less risky. Now, that's great when you have a team that's been working together over a long period. It's a small team. As you scale a company, scale an organization, you lose a lot of that intrinsic tacit knowledge of the team. Could an LLM and other types of Gen AI be useful in understanding and building a smell model, which is, the historical learnings, not the code, not the development, not the test, not the hard stuff, but the soft stuff, the experiences and the wisdom. Could you have an LLM that would basically be used like, oh, for this particular user story, we should have this person work on it for these reasons. This is the IDE they should use. And when they're done, this is the best QA person. These are the best QA techniques. I don't know. I'm just thinking almost like personality and some of the softer side that we often forget, that actually could double or triple the productivity of a team. I mean, project managers know this intuitively, but it's hard. And then to do that with an outsourced team, now you can have an outsourced supply chain of, when you have different suppliers, and you can actually optimize your supply chain of software. Just some ideas.
Those are pretty interesting ideas, Simon. And for those of you that do not know about Rapise is our scriptless automation product. And if already it is scriptless automation, and then if you are able to actually have it write the actual scripts itself and then verify it, so that that's like taking it to the next generation here. So I really love that particular idea, along with many other things that you were talking about, and the code quality is another wonderful idea. Now, Dermot, I know you mentioned you are in the business development side of it, the sales and account management angle. So from that account management, partner management angle as well, what are some of the things that you are hearing on the ground that, we could be doing, or we could start thinking in terms of, how we can promote and stuff like that? So any thoughts, any leads?
Well, I think it's very early days yet. We haven't really been hearing it a lot from customers, except that they're very interested in what we're able to do in terms of AI. But in terms of just working with customers and working with our partners, there's a lot of things we could be doing, and stuff personally I probably haven't even thought of. But a couple of things that come to mind, for example, we're using Zoom here. I think many of you will have seen that Zoom has an AI-based companion, which will take transcripts and summarize the occurrences that happen during a Zoom webinar or a Zoom meeting. There are similar technologies commercially available for any similar kinds of meetings. What strikes me as interesting is that you could fire up ChatGPT now during a meeting and just fire it some questions and maybe collaborate with it as it is. Again, it's important not to fall foul of the Google search effect of just asking questions and taking answers. And another thing that I've read that you shouldn't fall afoul of is AI face, where people are discussing something and then one person goes off and just goes on ChatGPT and their face goes blank because they're just talking and it's all quiet because people are pinging ChatGPT. What I'd like to see more is that if you take an engine like GPT or other language models, give it access to speech. So like Whisper or with Wyoming Protocol, for example, just being able to read what's being said to it and talk back. And then ideally, with an appropriately trained engine, maybe it can facilitate a conversation, make sure that everybody gets a voice, make sure that it doesn't get stuck or mired in any particular direction, and that everything that you scheduled to talk about during the course of the meeting is optimally covered during the course of the meeting. So those areas are things that I'd like to see happen. And then what happens to that information? Again, the large language model based engines are very good at taking information, repackaging it. So given everything that happened, can you turn it into action items? Can you turn it into risks, requirements, test cases from those requirements, and so on? Like there is a chain of potential artifacts that you can generate from using these models. Where do we start? I mean, to my mind, you could start at the very inception of an idea and just take it all the way to the very end. So from soup to nuts.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I mean, we have covered a lot of ground in the Gen AI, space over here, from the number of benefits it offers, as well as the risks in terms of the instilling effect that you were talking about, not necessarily programming our, bias into everything that we are doing, as well as, number of different ideas that Inflectra has in embracing this technology in our our flagship products at this point. So this is really wonderful. I do have one question from one of our customers. So do you have a customer use case wherein they are using generative AI in the automation of some of its process? If yes, what are some of the key takeaways from it? Do you have, does anyone want to take this particular question?
I could take it.
Sure.
On the Spira side, we got people who are looking at it and playing around with it. I think, as Simon said and Dermot said, we haven't got, I think, a concrete use case yet. They're still, or they haven't like distilled down and given us metrics to say we use it and it's helped in these ways. We know that everyone's excited about it. Everyone wants to use it. Everyone's been clamoring to get the Azure version so they can use it in a more private way. So it shows there's real demand. And I would say, before we talk about the use case, I was actually shocked by the customers that actually wanted it, because a lot of our customers are banks, insurance companies. I won't mention the company names, but the class of company are traditionally very conservative. And so when we released the ChatGPT functionality, I assumed it would be some of us are more like tech IT companies, startups, maybe fintech. Some of the less regulated companies would be the ones that would adopt it or seek to adopt it. But a lot of the companies that have come back to us are in the bio space or in banking, insurance, and finance, large companies, and in Europe and North America, across the board, actually. And so there's been huge interest in using it. Now, the one use case that we have had some feedback on is actually on the automation side. We had and I won't mention the name of this client either, but they actually started using Windows Copilot with Rapise, and they've actually been building the functionality before we built it, and they were able to use Windows Copilot to write a lot of their boilerplate automation scripts using Rapise, because Copilot uses the GitHub model. Its LLM learns from the public GitHub repos that we put out there. So we put a ton of frameworks out there. We were like, there are many major applications out there that you have to test. Dynamics, Salesforce, ServiceNow, a whole bunch of them. So we published on our public GitHub repos a lot of material for humans to learn how to use Rapise in different contexts. Well, turns out that all that data is perfect for an LLM to become proficient using Rapise on those kinds of applications. So this company that wanted to use Rapise with a Copilot is testing their own ERP system and CRM system, which probably looks a lot to the LLM like Salesforce, ServiceNow, and others. So when they started using it, it was already somewhat trained on a similar app. And so they've been using it very, very effectively to really automate a lot of the testing and build, very good initial automation scripts. But I think it was partly because their type of application aligns very heavily with the samples that we had published. And that goes back, I think, then to the appropriateness question that we raised earlier, which is, if the training data matches your use case, the correlation is going to be much higher. If they were building maybe a mobile app, I suspect, because we haven't got as many samples that are as rich on GitHub, we have some, but not as many, I suspect it wouldn't be quite as well achieved how to do that. So some of it was serendipity, but it also shows the importance of the training data.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for taking that question, Adam. There is one more question here. And again, if there are any questions, please use the chat forum to ask your question, or Q&A forum. I'm moderating both of them. This question is, what are some resources for testers to leverage to learn more about AI and how to use it in our day-to-day testing tasks? Thinking about a test oracle chatbot, in parentheses. So anyone wants to take this? Yes, Simon.
So if you want to learn more about AI, kind of divorce it from any tool or application you might use. For me, it's probably getting a bot, either Copilot or ChatGPT or another one, and interacting with it. And then you can ask it questions, fine, you can do that now. The thing to learn about is learn about prompt engineering, because that's what separates getting something that's not very useful from something very useful. And I think that will help you learn how these models don't think, but how you can get better results from them. There's lots of videos on YouTube about this. So a lot of our work into getting the good answers out from the things we've developed is how to engineer those prompts in a very specific way to get the right answers out. Because I think once you can have an idea and say, write me a test case, that's not how you need to ask it to ChatGPT or another model. You need to say, as a exploratory tester, please provide, I am testing this sort of application. Please write a test in this style that is in the very specific form. And the more precise you can be with it, the better your answers will be. So my notion could be, obviously, learn about what LLMs are in general. And I'd say specifically learn about prompt engineering, and that might help you get more value out of the tools.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the usual phrase, like, beware of what you ask. That's what is going to determine the answers. I'm glad you were mentioning that, Simon. I believe I may have skipped over one particular question, so I was just going through. This is about, I know it's still early days in the AI world, but have you seen any trends on the use of generative AI impact the overall quality and reliability of the software produced? Yes,
I would say
Dermot?
there are no trends yet. Certainly code has been put out onto the market using, for example, Copilot or similar technologies. But as to its efficacy, I think if it's going out into an off-the-shelf product, they're not necessarily going to tell us. So there's an awful lot out there that's happening that is under the auspices of GenAI that we may never know about. So I think those are lessons that kind of have to be learned in-house and then explored, and then I suppose collaborated once it's kind of been taken away from the proprietary code elements of it, so you can share that outwards with the broader practice community.
Right, absolutely. It's still in its infancy to even start thinking in terms of trends and trends analysis and stuff like that. So that's a very good point, Dermot. I believe I asked all the questions at this point. If there are no other questions or no other questions in the chat.
One thing, Sriram, I would just make the point what Dermot said was very interesting, is that it's all happening under the radar. And so I would say one of the things this to me in my mind suddenly went off was like traceability becomes even more important. If we can't get interpretability of an LLM model and the code that Copilot would generate, so let's assume that we can't always get that. But if we had traceability, if we knew that of this one user story, Copilot generated this bit of it, and that bit was not generated by a human, and this bit was then QA by someone else, you might be able to at least understand and be able to do some of that trend analysis. But because so much of it's happening under the covers and isn't being traced, it's very hard to make good metric assessments, because we don't know what percentage of a code that a developer claims they wrote was them versus. And then again, there's always been Stack Overflow driven development. So in some ways, it's a bit of an alternative to that, which is the same issue. Is it making the code better or worse? Is it better to ask Copilot or to copy off Stack Overflow? Discuss.
Yeah, discuss. Right. Right. Yes, thanks everyone. I know we are coming at the top of the hour. There's been a lot of wonderful discussions. Again, thanks Adam, Dermot, and Simon for really insightful discussions. These are not prescriptive questions over here, so we really got to cover a lot of ground over here. I may not have gotten to all the questions. If I skipped over any questions, we will review and get back to them. But please go and check our website. We have a lot of different webinars, white papers, case studies, and many other things that are available there. So please go check it out. And if there are any additional questions, please reach out to us. Until then, thank you very much for joining the webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.